Do it.
Mates Thrive Nation, it's all about psychedelics today, and I've got one of the leading voices, pioneers in psychedelic research and application. Brilliant website called Third Wave. We'll put the links in the show notes. If you want vetted suppliers and just administrators and coaches, he's got training practitioners that he's been training all over the world. So it's a privilege to have Paul Austin on the show.
Thanks, Steve, for making the time and the space to have me on. I can't wait to connect with your audience and chat more about psychedelics.
Brilliant, Jen. Author of Mastering Microdoses. Brilliant book. Well done. And what I love about you, Paul, is you just put it all pen to paper. You've got incredible websites, and we'll put those on good socials as well. Really trying to empower people, educate people, inspire people, and just guide people along this incredible journey of psychedelics that I'm getting into slowly and carefully. We've obviously got some medical legal issues here in South Africa, but being a practitioner of functional medicine for 17 years, I'm really excited about this field, and I think it's going to just grow internationally. So thanks for all the work you do. You're a podcaster. We'll put a link to that. I think a brilliant show. I think the Psychedelic podcast as well, entrepreneur and author. So yeah, I just really appreciate your calling.
Thank you, Steve. I can't wait to dive in with you.
Cool. I want to give you a bit of a frame, Paul, in terms of the avatars we're seeing. I run multiple health and wellness businesses, and what I'm seeing more and more, after 24 years of practice, is that we're seeing mental ill health at another level, burnout and adrenal fatigue and tiredness, and all these cognitive problems that people are just battling to deal with in society. It's really just sad to see more and more people, young people, struggling with anxiety, depression, and obviously I think there's a new wave coming through. I love the third wave, and we'll get into the backstory of that. But the avatar that I want you to frame, all the changes that you've done with regards to, just seeing patients in a different light, seeing clients in a different light, seeing people in a different light, and giving them other, ways to treat this, is someone who's a corporate, possibly male or female, and who's really struggling to juggle balls in life, and extremely sort of stressed out and distressed, and often on some sleeping aids, battling to sleep, insomnia, a real under pressure with family and commitments and that. And take us through a possible journey, with this avatar, because I love the words on your website is like, you want to use psychedelics as a skill for personal growth, creative insight, and professional transformation. And I think that's just profound. So take us through a journey and a story of someone with that type of avatar who you help, so that people can latch onto a real story, and then we'll dive into what is a psychedelic and the different subgroups in that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I'll do is sort of like an amalgamation of various anecdotes to sort of hone in on what that archetype is struggling with, because I think it's very commonplace in today's world, where you have a corporate warrior who has been, let's say in this case, quite successful at their job, but it's come at the expense of their health, it's come at the expense of their family, it's come at the expense of their mental health, their mindset. And there's a point that, especially now more than ever, I think a lot of people reach this point during the sort of COVID pandemic lockdown of, I no longer want to live this way, right? Like I actually can make other choices and decisions. I don't need to submit myself to this level of just kind of stress in order to live a good life. And so when we look at psychedelics in particular and what they do, a lot of it comes down to what I call a deconditioning process, where particularly when we work with higher doses of psychedelics, but also at these lower doses of psychedelics, the sort of corporate warrior who is really putting themselves through quite a bit, they are often pursuing a path that is not theirs. They're pursuing a path that they've been conditioned into believing will lead to some outcome of success from their parents, from their culture, from broader media. And so when we're looking at this corporate warrior as they want to start to engage with psychedelics, I think the most impactful thing that happens is a letting go of all the things that aren't theirs, a letting go of what isn't necessarily serving them, and a choice to do less, but to pursue the things that are done with excellence and with a sense of balance and patience. So as an example, right? Someone who, let's say they have a family, they're working 60 hours a week, they're making $250,000 a year. The first often step is just setting better boundaries, right? There's often a situation where if someone is in a corporate workspace, they feel compelled to do what they're told at all times because they fear, they worry that if they don't, they'll get fired, they'll lose their job, they,
Mm.
will be left out to some degree. So I think first is getting through this fear of not being enough, right? The insecurity of if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I won't be able to be quote unquote successful in what I do. Because once we can get over that fear, and once we really honor and acknowledge this is what I need to feel healthy, this is what I need to thrive, then I think that allows for a little bit more spaciousness. And then when that spaciousness opens up, then we can start to ask these difficult questions around, do I really want to keep doing this? Do I really want to keep pursuing this job? Because one of the most common things that happens with people who are in this situation and they work with psychedelics is they come to realize that there is a distinct lack of alignment between their personal lives and their professional lives. So it's almost like they're being pulled in one direction personally and one direction professionally. And so a lot of what psychedelics do is, how do we create greater alignment so it doesn't feel as if we're sort of this Jekyll and Hyde, right? Where we have to be this person in this situation and that person in this other situation. But instead, we can find work that really, really aligns with us and that we love. And the vast majority of people who work in a corporate workspace do not do work that they love. Now, there are exceptions to that. I know that undoubtedly. But if people are feeling stressed and burnt out, if they're feeling overwhelmed and they're working a high level corporate job, chances are they're not enjoying the work. Because as you know, as an entrepreneur, as I know as an entrepreneur, even when we're working long hours, even when things feel challenging, there's a sense of meaning and fulfillment within that work. It feels like I love this so much. I'm so committed to this mission that I'll do whatever it takes, within reason, of course. And I think what psychedelics can do is they can just help create more alignment. So folks go, okay, if I am going to give up this much of my time and energy, I'm going to do it for something that I feel is a really compelling mission, that I really want to, that I feel like it's going to leave, a legacy that's going to have a really positive impact. I
Yeah.
think those types of reframes often occur through psychedelics, and that greater alignment just allows for a healthier nervous system. It allows for a healthier mindset and a healthier body.
But now, when they want to start the journey, Paul, do they come to you and say, you know what, I'm in this place, I've got this fear? Do you do the pre-work? I know you, I mean, I've had a look at you and listened that you do a lot of pre-work, because some people can't see a way out. They can't break through that amygdala, that reptilian part of the brain. The fear is just overriding, this frontal cortex. They have no way out. They feel that they've got way too many responsibilities, either for their family or their children or their parents. And so how does it work? Because many people go to talk therapy, or they do a lot of these other therapies, or they go on antidepressants. And antidepressants, I want to state there, the correct use, I think, is a viable option. Why I think psychedelics, I think, is the future, is that the antidepressants are being taken on a daily basis for a long-term duration. And so although it can stabilize a ship, it's a lot of medication over long term, where the psychedelic journey, which is I'm very excited about, is sometimes a small dose over time that can cause changes that is not, you're not going to be taking it for 7 years and get a script every 6 months from your physician. So let's go through that archetype, as you said, or that avatar that I've mentioned, and say, how does the journey start, and what is the typical time frame, and what results do you see, so that someone who's listening saying, geez, do I need to do this, and can I do this, and is this for me?
So the first step is always assessment, right? So with any clients that I work with, or any clients that come through our system, we have them fill out an assessment, and it asks them questions like, name, birthday, age, but also, do they have any prior experience with psychedelics? Do they have any quote unquote mental health challenges? Have they, been clinically diagnosed with anything? Are they on certain psychiatric medications? Do they have any background or practices, even with contemplative practices like meditation, yoga, breath work? Um, how stressed are they, what is causing that stress, what are some of the challenges that they're facing maybe in their relationships or in their professional life. So just getting like a really full assessment of who is this person, where are they at, what are their challenges, but then I think even more importantly than that, what is it that they want to create, right? What is it that they feel compelled to shift and change? Because I think, you mentioned therapy. There is, I think, therapy is helpful and important, but the therapeutic process, I think, is limited in the scope of what it can accomplish. And so for a lot of people who are more ambitious and driven and want to create, this element of how do we combine psychedelics with coaching? And so much of coaching is engaging with the client, clarifying, what is it that you want to create? Who is it that you want to become? What work do you want to do? Really getting them to think big picture, getting them to think from an inspirational perspective, getting them to think outside of sort of the mundane everyday, and be inspired by a vision of the life that they want to create. Right. And so once that has happened in the assessment, and then we go into preparation, then it's about, well, okay, based on your situation, based on, if someone is on any psychiatric medications or not, this is the medicine that we'll use. This is how much we'll do of it. This is the way that you're going to set up your space in order to do it. This is a guide or a coach or a therapist, especially if we're not in the same physical location, that can be there, that can hold space for you. Um, because the medicine, the type of psychedelic also matters. For a lot of people who are brand new to this, MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, is often a great starter. However, if someone is on a psychiatric medication like an SSRI, they can't do MDMA with that. So that's where this assessment process comes in, because if someone is on a psychiatric medication, let's say they're on Prozac or Zoloft or even an antipsychotic, psilocybin is going to be the ideal starting medicine, and probably a low dose of psilocybin. So what I also tell my clients is start low and go slow. That this is a path that you are starting, and oftentimes the bad trips or the challenging experiences happen because someone overshot what they were ready for. So I think a lot of the process of preparation is getting someone to start to prepare to go into this deep space. I might have them go do a flotation tank. I might have them do some breath work. I might have them just sit in 30 minutes of meditation and see if they can just sit in stillness for 30 minutes. Because when you throw a psychedelic in there, it's really going to be an intense experience. And so I just want to make sure that they have a little bit of groundwork before they go into that. And then once they've had that psychedelic experience, especially if it's at a higher dose, oftentimes the insights and the downloads are around, man, like I am really stressed, and now I'm starting to understand why I'm so stressed. Or wow, like I have a lot of self-loathing because I'm doing work that I hate all the time, so I'm really, I really hate myself for doing it. Or man, because I'm so stressed, I treat my wife or my husband or I treat my children, in not such a great way. So a lot of the insights that come through then is, how are we relating to ourselves? How are we relating to our friends and our family? And then how are we relating to the greater environment, to our work, to our career, to our community? And so the shifts that then start to happen is people, first of all, a lot of folks who are brand new to this, who are stepping into this world, the first step is self-care, right? How do you integrate more practices and more behaviors like breath work, yoga, meditation? How do you change your diet, your exercise, your sleep, so it's actually more supportive of a relaxed nervous system? And that is what the focus of integration is. So after we have this high dose experience, we go into the process of integration. And then the focus of integration is, you've had all these ahas, you've had these insights, these downloads. Now, how do you ensure that those become integrated into your everyday basis? Because for about a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks after a high dose experience, the capacity for you to change behaviors is at an elevated level, because psychedelics facilitate massive neuroplasticity, right? They're incredible tools for facilitating neuroplasticity. And that's great in a coaching container, because so much of coaching, as you mentioned, is to get over this fear response from the amygdala, to dream something that is inspiring that we want to step into, and then to actually take the necessary steps to go there, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it feels like we might have to, you know, Like there are a lot of folks who make choices and decisions that it means they have to cut off certain relationships, or they have to, have difficult conversations. But that cutting off those difficult conversations, psychedelics can help get over that fear response to make those choices that we know are in our best interest. The sort of archetypal mythological is like when you face the dragon, you get the gold, right? And so there's a lot of ways in which we have to face our own inner dragons. We have to confront them in order to actually become the person that we know we can become.
Brilliant. Let's just go with, say, this avatar, this archetype being, let's just call the person Becky. So Becky would have done the health assessment. And then let's just, for instance, say she's, right in your town or in your city, and you decide on the psychedelic. Is it a process where they come into a room? How long is it generally? Obviously, it's dependent on the different psychedelic, but this corporate worker, they've done the pre-work with a coach, they've seen the coach, maybe they've got insights, maybe they can't even see a future. A lot of these people cannot even see a future. So just take us through the actual practical steps of, and how this person, the general theme or the general way it would work. Is it one session in an afternoon? Is it IV? Is it tablets? Is it 3 sessions? I mean, what is the typical framework that would cause significant transformation with Becky?
So what I typically do is I have people in a 6-month container,
Okay.
right? So I say we really need to commit to a minimum of 6 months. That's the amount of time that it's gonna take to make significant change. You depending on the client, it's usually 2 or 3 high dose experiences with microdosing woven in between sessions to help to continue to keep neuroplasticity high, so it's easy to make behavioral changes. And like I said, we usually start with MDMA or psilocybin. Those experiences usually last, I would say, anywhere from 5 to 6 hours. I'll host people at my home. I live in San Diego, so I'll host people at my home. They'll come over. We'll drop in a little bit. I might do a guided meditation for them. And then I usually set up a really nice space for them to be able to, if they want to sit, if they want to lie down, they have that opportunity. There's music that's played. And typically with MDMA, it's a pill. It's a white powder. With psilocybin, chocolates are the most common form in which psilocybin is delivered. So they'll either take the pill or eat the chocolate, and then they'll go on about a 4 to 5 hour journey. And the first hour to 90 minutes can be the most, in some cases, can be the most intense, because they're going through a process called the come up, where the medicine is starting to hit. They're noticing that their heart rate is starting to increase. Their vision may shift and change. Their sense of touch and smell might shift and change. They might start to have visuals. So a lot of what I coach clients through is during that early process, when it's quite intense, to really anchor in the breath, to come back to the breath again and again, to nose breathe again and again, to breathe deep into the diaphragm, because our breath is our anchor. And when we remember that these intense experiences that we're moving through are only temporary, then we can anchor in that breath. We can allow the emotions to move through, because oftentimes the association, and especially for someone in a corporate work environment, they've been taught to suppress their emotions for years, if not decades, right? So oftentimes when we're working with a high dose of psychedelics for the first time, all of a sudden, all these emotions that we had kept kind of like battered down, all are starting to come up. The anger, the sadness, the joy, the bliss, right? The grief, maybe. And so that breath allows us to continue to regulate our nervous system even as the emotions come up, because the coaching, the sort of frame is always surrender, right? The more we resist, the more we try to fight it, the more intense it becomes in some way, right? Like what you resist persists. And so a lot of the coaching in these high dose is just surrender, anchor in the breath, surrender, let go, allow the emotions to come up, kind of move through them. And that'll happen over 3, 4, 5 hours. And then towards the tail end, right, they will have often had a massive release. They'll maybe have confronted stories from their childhood, difficult experiences that they went through, maybe ways that they didn't feel loved by their parents or their community. And then that's when integration begins. And what I always tell clients is, for the first, hour to 2 hours, take it easy, take it slow. even for the first week after a high dose experience, take it easy, take it slow. Don't try to rush back into your everyday life. I usually recommend lots of walks, lots of meditation, maybe time for baths. And I think for anyone in a corporate environment or a high stress job environment, if you are going in to have, a high dose psychedelic experience, and let's say you're doing it over a weekend, like on a Saturday, take that Sunday off, that Monday off, that Tuesday off, give yourself a little bit of breathing room before you jump right back into your job. Because when you jump back into that normal everyday life, some of those old habits are going to start to move in. And so you really want to give yourself a little bit of spaciousness to allow for that. So that would be the first. And then depending on the client, I might do that again 2 or 3 months after. And then another one like 2 months after at the end of the 6 month mark. And a lot of it is just learning how to work with emotions, processing emotions, allowing emotions to come up, and then in clearing a lot of that gunk underneath, all of a sudden it becomes possible for us to have clarity and insight about what it is that we want to create. And then the last thing I'll note, because I wrote the book on it, Mastering Microdosing, is microdosing is a great tool to weave in between those high dose sessions. Because oftentimes what people notice is they have these high dose sessions. They feel like for a week or two after those sessions, life feels much more flowy. They make better decisions. They can shift and change a lot easier. But then at some point, the old ways start to come in. And so microdosing is a way to just keep those channels of neuroplasticity open for longer so we can continue to weave in new ways of being as we go back into our everyday life.
Brilliant. Now, just tell us about the archetype and the avatar. What transformation do you see? I mean, are they in a place where they make radical changes, where they've created a new world for them? They've got less fear, or has trauma been unlocked? I mean, someone's listening and saying, okay, I go through a 3-6 month process, but what's transformation and how long is it going to last? And I think in the same breath, Paul, if you can just sort of define or describe and explain neuroplasticity, because I think that is a crux of this whole process.
Great question. So I'll respond to that with a metaphor. And that's the metaphor of the lotus flower, because when people start to work with psychedelics for the first time, they often want immediate, let's say, enlightenment, or they want, from day one to day two, their life to be changed and transformed rapidly. And the truth is that change and transformation happens slowly until it happens quickly, right? There's sort of a lot of work that needs to be done to till the soil in this lotus flower metaphor, to heal the trauma, to heal the gunk that we've stored in our subconscious and our unconscious. And oftentimes when I work with clients, the first 3 months minimum is just dedicated to clearing that gunk, clearing that emotion, clearing that trauma, right? Like really starting to till the soil. And then once it feels like, okay, like I've had a chance to confront some of these stories from my past, heal the trauma that has been maybe preventing me or blocking me, then we plant what I call the new seed of self. And what's really interesting about these psychedelics is they facilitate a process called ego dissolution or ego death, where normally in our everyday life, our ego is our personality. It's very rigid. We have these certain identities and beliefs about who we are. And when we take a high dose of a psychedelic, all of a sudden, those are in many ways wiped clean. And so we have this sort of death and rebirth process. And so with that death and rebirth process, we plant that new seed of self, and that new seed of self then needs nourishment. It needs water and sunlight and fertilizer and food. And what that means is we need to nourish ourselves. We need to give ourselves walks and good food and good relationships, meditate, breath work. We need to weave in behaviors that really help to support and nourish that new seed of self so it can really blossom and flourish as a lotus flower. And in sort of the Buddhist tradition, the lotus flower is the symbol of enlightenment. And so I think the end goal, and I'm not saying this happens at the end of 6 months, but oftentimes at some point within those 6 months, there's a feeling of enlightenment. There's a feeling of transcendence. There's a feeling of experiencing the state of oneness, or experiencing these massive aha moments. The metaphor that I like to use to describe it is, we take a helicopter to the top of the mountain. We see the peak of who we're becoming. We see how incredible we can be as a human. And then at the end of the psychedelic experience, the helicopter goes back down, and it's up to us to do the work to continue to walk that path. And so within a 6-month container, what most often happens is people they improve the relationships with their partners, their spouse, their kids. They're a little bit more patient, they're less reactive, they're more compassionate, they're better listeners. I think that's the first important thing to root in, is they really notice an improvement in how they're relating to other humans. I think the second point is there's, like I mentioned before, just better boundaries that are set. There's a recognition that I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It's creating, more stress in my nervous system. I don't need to make those decisions. I can make different decisions. And so people start to make different choices and decisions that leave them in sort of a less stressed way of being. Your listeners are probably familiar with this: the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic versus sympathetic. Oftentimes, corporate warriors are spending all of their time in fight or flight. And when they work with psychedelics, they really experience that state of rest and digest, that parasympathetic state. And so a lot of the work that they're doing is, how do I spend more time in the parasympathetic state? And then for a lot of folks, the final step is either quitting their job to do something that feels more in alignment, or restructuring how they engage with their professional life so it's a lot healthier. So by no means does everyone have this experience or go through a coaching process and quit their job. A lot of people still have families they need to support. They have income. That's important. But they're able to sort of renegotiate how they approach their work, so that way it feels a lot more in balance, and it doesn't feel like it's slowly killing them both physically and on a soul level on a day-to-day basis. So those are I would say the three most impactful things. One is healing the trauma, getting the gunk out, releasing the emotions. Two is being able to better negotiate boundaries, spend more time in a parasympathetic state. And then three is renegotiating how we relate to our professional career. And the key with neuroplasticity within all of that is, neuroplasticity is the capacity for the brain, the body, the self to change. And so when we're working with psychedelics, what's happening from a neurobiological level is it's activating something called the 5-HT2A receptor. So the 5-HT2A receptor is one of 14 serotonin receptors. It's largely responsible for executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex. And so the prefrontal cortex is how we make our decisions. It's how we, think about our day-to-day life. It's how we envision, a new way of living. And so when we're working with psychedelics, it's activating the 5-HT2A receptor. That's helping to create something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is a precursor to neuroplasticity. And so much of coaching then, and I think this is an important part to emphasize, it is really important to have a coach or a therapist as someone goes into this. There is a certain level of efficacy that can be had by doing this, just finding resources and assets online, and maybe microdosing by yourself. I kind of give the thumbs up on microdosing, but if you intend to do higher doses, always find a coach or a therapist, because they're really going to help to ensure that the outcomes and results are tangible and integrated, that it's not just another drug experience, that it's not just this thing this aha that you have, but nothing ever happens with it, that it actually becomes integrated into your everyday basis. And I think that's another really important part to emphasize, is the neuroplasticity is important. And so much of neuroplasticity is adapting to new circumstances and new situations, right? So I have this insight, I have this aha, I have this download. My fear response from the amygdala is downregulated. I'm more willing to make courageous choices that otherwise I would sort of shy away from. And then in making those courageous choices, I can actually adapt to the new circumstances that will result from those courageous choices, because I'm continuing to work with psychedelics, which is keeping that channel of neuroplasticity open for longer.
Well said, well summarized. Love those 3 points. You got through it incredibly. Yeah, well done. I've got a lot of questions regarding that. The first one is about the autonomic nervous system and measurements like heart rate variability, because we use that as a marker. We find it to be very accurate, repeatable, and precise. So we're using Aura in the country, using Whoop. Yeah, I see you got it on. And it's been highly beneficial to put interventions in place, because a lot of these corporate workers and leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs as well, are very data centric, and they want to see the changes. So what has your experience showed you with regards to heart rate variability through the process of using psychedelics?
Yeah, so time and time again, what happens when we release emotions, when we let go of stress, when we spend more time in a parasympathetic state, heart rate variability increases and resting heart rate naturally drops, right? And what's really interesting is they've started to do research on the epigenetics of psychedelic assisted therapy, and they've shown that epigenetically we're seeing changes at the way that genes are I forget the exact term, but the way that they're representing themselves, or the sort of function that they
Expression.
have in expression, the gene expression. Thank you. And so what's happening with a lot of this, especially for more of the clinical and therapeutic work, but this is also, I think, relevant for anyone who's dealing with a lot of stress, is after MDMA assisted psychotherapy, what's happening is the telomere length is increasing substantially as a result of working with psychedelics. And we know that telomere are tied to longevity. And so I think when we're looking at the utility of psychedelics, no, undoubtedly they can help to increase HRV, to lower resting heart rate, to increase telomere length. I think because of that mechanism of helping us to release emotions which are tied to stress, and to shift the decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis that are making us more stressed. One other thing to note within that is there is a really great wearable that I can't recommend highly enough. It's called the Apollo Neuro.
Yeah,
And
we've
the
had
Apollo
Dr.
Neuro,
Raven on the show, and we
you have,
bring
okay.
it
So
into South
Dave's
Africa, and yeah, we've
great.
sold a lot of Apollos, because South Africa is regarded actually in Bloomberg in 2015 as the second most stressful country to live in the world, and so we've got real challenges here
Because of
from
some
it,
of the tensions and yeah.
tensions and crime and safety and infrastructure. So yeah, incredible product, and we've seen great improvement in a lot of our clients and patients.
It's fantastic. Dave's a faculty in our training program. He's also a good friend. And so I think the sense of the Apollo Neuro, the frequency of sound, how it sort of gets woven into your nervous system. This is slightly esoteric, but I'm just going to say it anyway. There's a way in which when we work with these plant medicines, mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro, they themselves have a frequency, that there's an intelligence in these plants, and the frequency that a lot of these psychoactive medicines have is incredibly high. And so when we start to work with that frequency, when we imbibe it, when it gets into our nervous system, it's actually helping to sort of allow it facilitates a process of catharsis. I think if there's one word to take away from this today, it's catharsis. And that catharsis is a release of all of the low frequency, low vibration, pent up stress that we subject ourselves to on an everyday basis. And when we release that, then naturally the nervous system feels a little bit more expanded, a little bit more free, which results in a higher HRV and a lower resting heart rate.
Brilliant. My second question is regarding the coaching. We haven't defined what a psychedelic is, and we're 35 minutes into the show, but I think the story is very important. The narrative is very important for people to grab hold of. But is it not something to consider that actually everybody should start with a coach initially? Just because I've had many people in my life, patients, clients, who've done the microdosing, but done it incorrectly and said, oh, you know what? This isn't working. This didn't change me. It wasn't good. And that first experience being very important with regards to transformation. Or, they do these magic mushroom like parties, and they combine it with alcohol, and then it's only a microdose. It's a microdose. And it was radical, but life carries on. They jump into the same house, same work, same lifestyle. And then it gets tainted as this party trick, or it gets tainted as, oh, well, I didn't make a difference. And then all of a sudden going from a microdose to a mega dose, and something goes wrong, and then we get it tainted to say, oh, well, look at this now, it's unregulated, it's a real problem. And what we've said to a lot of our listeners in the tribe at Mate's Tribe, it's all in the dose, whether it's healthy water, whether it's antidepressants, whether it's healthy food, dose is key. And so what is your opinion on everyone starting this journey with a certified coach, or someone who can can guide you along the journey, because it seems like more than a journey than someone just saying, oh, well, I've got a good source of, psychedelics, and I'm just going to try it for a few days and great, see if it works or not.
So it's sort of it is in many ways. All of these points are so great, and I'm so glad you brought them up, Steve, because they're incredibly relevant for this conversation. I'd say the only reason I mentioned microdosing as a way to potentially start without needing quote unquote a coach or professional support is because the potential risk is much lower than someone jumping in the deep end and doing 5 grams of mushrooms by themselves. However, education is key for this. And so even if someone's listening to this and they're like, I just want to like kind of get my feet wet and get a sense of how microdosing could work, read the book, right? Mastering Microdosing, because that's at least going to give you a sense of here's how you set up a protocol, here's how you calibrate your dose level. Here are some things that you could expect, some changes in your subjective experience. Here are ways to track and measure it. Right. There is a way in which we, more than ever, as you know, with personalized medicine, we can be our own coach. And that doesn't mean that if you want to like continue on this path, and particularly if you're expecting to see substantial results, if you really have a lot of asks in coming into this, absolutely 100% a coach is required. And I think for your audience in particular, a coach is great. A therapist can be helpful, right? But a therapist is more about, I would say, kind of like just it's a therapist can be a band-aid sometimes. It's soothing, it's nice, it helps us to reflect on our past, to get clarity on why we are what we are. But if we really want to be powerful creators, if we want to be sovereign autonomous beings that are fully showing up in life to leave a legacy, to create something that will impact, people in a really beautiful way, I think aligning with a coach who is just a great coach generally, irrespective of psychedelics, but B, knows and understands the skill of psychedelics and has walked that path themselves, right? There are a lot of people, and this is the thing to be mindful of, there are a lot of people who position themselves as Instagram shamans who, they went to Peru and they drank ayahuasca a few times, or maybe they grew their own mushrooms and had a few mushroom experiences. And now they have this sort of messiah complex where they know everything there is to know about psychedelics, and they're not going to help you to guide you through it. I myself have been working with psychedelics intentionally for 14 years, right? Since the age of 19. I am still every day learning new things about these medicines and how they show up, and some of the risks around them, and how to be mindful about their use, and what's the context around lineage and reciprocity and even cultural appropriation. So there's a lot of nuance within this. And so to work with someone who's walked that path themselves, who has gone through who's faced their own dragons, confronted their own demons, who has grown tremendously as a result of psychedelics, that I think is a person that creates more rapport, creates more trust, and will allow you to really trust them as you're going into, for many people, this is the most vulnerable that they will ever be, right? This is the most, right? When you work with psychedelics, you're in a very, very vulnerable state. And so you need to make sure that you're doing that work with someone who is experienced, who you can trust, and who has walked the path themselves. And this is a lot about how I even structure our training program for coaches. We have, about a quarter of the coaches who enroll are executive coaches, a quarter are health and wellness, a quarter are life and relationship, and then about a quarter are clinicians who want to expand their practice. And the focus of the training program, it's about a 10-month training program, is we teach you something. Sure, there's the theory, there's the different context around the different psychedelics, microdosing versus higher dosing versus non-psychedelic modalities, safety and ethics. And I weave in a 6-day intensive where we all go to Costa Rica and we actually have a high dose psilocybin journey. We do a microdose together. We do breath work. We do a temescal, a sweat lodge. And I focus that 6 days on personal transformation for the coach, because I want them to have walked the path themselves before they're actually going to go support other clients. And then we have a 6-month practicum on the back end where we train coaches on what I call the 5 key elements: assessment, which we already talked about, preparation, holding space or facilitation, integration, and microdosing. If you're working with a coach, I would say this to anyone, if you're working with a coach, they should know those 5 elements really well. They should know how to assess, prepare, facilitate, integrate, and microdose, um, because that allows for not just an emphasis on the experience itself, but it will help you as a client to feel held in this full container. Um, and I think that's important to emphasize, as you mentioned. Like, this isn't just about taking a psychedelic. This isn't just about taking some mushrooms and seeing what happens. This really is working with a very powerful tool that, if used with intention, skillfulness, and responsibility, can have a massive impact in a positive way. If it's not used in that way, it can also be massively traumatizing potentially. And so I think that's another important thing to emphasize, is people who just take mushrooms and go party and drink alcohol along it, in some ways they're asking for it, right? There could be a very difficult experience that then traumatizes them forever. And so they'll potentially lose out on the potential of psychedelics because, when they used it, they didn't do so with the reverence that's necessary when working with a substance that's this powerful.
Brilliant sort of process with the coaching. I think that's fantastic, and it looks like you've done your due diligence, and you want to put people that are highly trained into the space that are using the correct products. So I know we've come down this road, but what is a psychedelic? I'm looking to do ketamines, and the only reason I'm looking to do ketamines, because I've never done it, is I trust the person who's going to put up the IV ketamine. Talk about coaches, Paul. I can't understand this process, and maybe you can give a bit of clarity. Is like, you go somewhere to some remote place, you don't know the shaman, you've never met the person has got no record of who you are, or they're trying to summarize you with an initial consultation or initial day. I mean, how much do you know someone after a day? But if you've got a relationship with someone, you trust them, they know you, you get a good feel for them. Is that not better to have, whether it's a physician, therapist, coach, who's got skill, but who actually understands who you are and can take you along the journey? So that's what I'm thinking. So maybe you can define
Like
what a
one-to-one
psychedelic.
work versus big group retreat work, or
Just repeat the question.
are you talking like one-to-one work versus
Yeah.
big retreat work to some degree? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's
Yeah.
also another thing. I've had a lot of people go on these big retreats, and they in a place where no one knows them, they're not around, they don't know what's happening to them. This person is classified as a shaman who's got a lot of experience, but there's just no safety. And I mean, safety, I think, is built in, on trust. And how do you trust this person initially without having connected with them and felt them, had a conversation with them, embraced them, watched them? So that's my concern, with a lot of these things. And that's why I'm starting with ketamine. So maybe define psychedelics and make a comment on that last, comment that I made.
So the word psychedelic comes from two Greek words, psyche meaning mind and delos meaning manifesting. And it came about in the 60s when Aldous Huxley, who is a well-known writer, wrote Brave New World and this book called Island, which is fantastic. When Aldous Huxley was exchanging letters with a gentleman named Humphrey Osmond, who was this wealthy, eccentric businessman from Canada. And Humphrey Osmond coined the term psychedelic. And essentially what it means is, when we take a psychedelic, we are opening the aperture of our consciousness. We're in normal everyday reality. We have our conscious awareness. It's focused, it's limited, so we can do our everyday tasks that need to get done. And what this happens is, things that are stored in our subconscious or unconscious, as we mentioned before, emotions or narratives or past experiences, they often just get pushed down. And so when we take a psychedelic, it opens that aperture of our consciousness, which allows us to access the subconscious and unconscious material that we may not otherwise have been aware of. And, the classic psychedelics are tryptamines, lysergamides, and phenethylamines. So tryptamines, that's psilocybin is a tryptamine, DMT is a tryptamine, ayahuasca is a tryptamine, lysergamides or LSD in particular, and then phenethylamines are things like mescaline, San Pedro, peyote. There are a few others in there as well, like iboga, which is a root bark from Gabon, is a really intense psychedelic. But generally speaking, those are the classic psychedelics: tryptamines, lysergamides, and phenethylamines. However, in the last 10 to 20 to 30 years, the substances like MDMA, ketamine, 2CB, and there are several other more synthetic substances that have sort of come into awareness that are none of those. And so the classic conversation is ketamine a psychedelic or not, right? Is cannabis even a psychedelic or not? And I think what is important to focus on is breath work a psychedelic or not, right? So in some ways, anything can be a psychedelic as long as it's helping to manifest these aspects and elements of the mind, the subconscious and the unconscious aspects of the mind that we normally keep kind of tucked away. So all of that to say is I think all of those medicines that I mentioned, ketamine, MDMA, LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, iboga, San Pedro, peyote, all of these we can consider psychedelics as long as they are used with intention and responsibility, because that safety is what allows us to access these parts of ourselves that aren't normally online. And then in terms of kind of weaving into your other question, then the trust and rapport that's established, like you mentioned, and like we've talked about, these are very vulnerable experiences, right? So to just sort of randomly find someone on Instagram, they say, hey, come work with me. Maybe you have a 30-minute phone call to start, and then you go work with someone. I think that is a very poor decision overall, right? Like, you really want to know this person, you really want to trust this person, you really want to have rapport established. So what I recommend to everyone who is maybe fairly new at this is first see if there's a friend that you trust who's worked with someone that they can go, I really love this person, they were great, right? Because oftentimes the networks of our friends, if that trust has already been established, are great people to start with. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are new to this don't have any friends who have actually worked with psychedelics before, right? And so the question is, well, how do I find someone that I can trust? And my frame on that is, first of all, at Third Wave, we have a directory of vetted retreats, clinics, therapists, and coaches. So we don't just put anyone and everyone up there. All the folks that we include in our directory, we've vetted to some degree. We know the people who run them, we've attended them, we've trained them, right? So there's a level of trust that's been built and established there. But don't just take our word for it. Talk with those people, converse with those people, ask them questions, get a sense of who they are, their background, how they facilitate their experiences, and ensure that they do their proper diligence on assessment, preparation, and integration. You should always ask them questions. How do you prepare clients for experiences? How do you set up your experiences with clients? Especially if you're going to a retreat, do they have a medical professional who is there during those experiences in case anything were to happen? What do you do for integration after people leave, right? All of these are really important questions. And so I think it really behooves the person who is interested in working with psychedelics to do your due diligence, right? Ask those difficult questions, because this very well could be one of the most transformative experiences of your life. And you don't want to put yourself in the hands of people who you don't know if you can trust. You don't know if you can fully surrender, because that will inevitably dramatically impact the quality of your experience.
Well said. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there, a lot of experience there in terms of dealing with thousands of clients in the US. Yeah, we're coming to the end of the show, and transformation is just such a key part of Made to Thrive, because I've seen so many people that haven't sustained their transformation and that. But I do want to ask you, Paul, the risks, that can go wrong with this incredibly powerful tool. And you said, like, there should be a medical professional, possibly at these retreats, and and there's a lot of there's a lot of folklore. Oh, this happened, that happened, and there's a lot of rumors that go around. I mean, you've probably got some good stats on, geez, out of 1,000 experiences with psilocybin, it's 1 out of 1,000, and the medical professional was there. Give us a little bit of sort of guidance with regards to mitigating against risk and what happens if there is a complication.
So the biggest risk by far is that these substances are illegal, right? That is in many ways the biggest risk, because of prohibition, potential, issues as it relates to getting these substances, even the mindset of people, if they know it's illegal and they're working with it, can kind of fuck with it. So that, I would say, just to help to contextualize this, is the biggest risk. The other risks are, one, if someone has a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, to not engage with psychedelics. That's just like, if a no across the board. If you have a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, It's best not to engage with these substances. If you're on certain psychiatric medications and you want to work with psychedelics, you need to do so with the support of a medical professional. That doesn't mean that you can't have a coach as well, but you definitely need to be supported by a medical professional if you're going to, for example, wean off Prozac or Zoloft and start to microdose or work with psychedelics instead. Because one of the risks that we see is people go cold turkey, and that can lead to suicidality, and that can lead to greater challenges because they've been on certain medications for 20 years and they just went cold turkey on them because a silly shaman told them to do it, or something like that. So I think one is if you're on any psychiatric medications, to work with a medical professional to support you. I would say psychedelics are the safest drug known to man, particularly psilocybin mushrooms, safer than alcohol, tobacco, safer than cannabis, safer than obviously heroin and cocaine and, methamphetamines. So it is not possible to have a physiological, like an overdose from psychedelics. You can't take so much that you die. You can take so much that you make a stupid choice or decision to, for example, jump out of a window, and that can lead to death. But that is so rare these days. But there are challenges and risks that happen with that. So I'd say the biggest risk is, outside of prohibition, is doing a very high dose of a psychedelic without having the proper guidance and support to be there with you, because nothing will happen physiologically, but you can make a psychological decision that could put you at risk. So I think that's why it's important to emphasize, if you're going to do a high dose of these medicines, to do that with a coach, a therapist, or at least a trip sitter, a friend who knows this, who can be there for you, who can support you in case anything goes wrong. The medical issues at high doses of psychedelics usually happens if someone has comorbidities, or if they have a history of psychiatric like psychiatric challenges. They have a history of PTSD or depression or deep addiction, if they're on certain psychiatric medications, and they're also working with high doses of psychedelics, then that almost always requires a medical professional there. Even if it is in small group work or one-on-one work, you really want to make sure that if you have a history of certain medical issues, that you have someone there. We do retreats, for these intensives, the training program. We have about 45 people who come to the retreats. It's about 35 participants and 11 or 12 facilitators. I always have a medical professional there, a medical doctor, and an EMT. We do screening. The vast majority of people are not on any psychiatric medications, but when you're doing this type of work in larger groups, there's just more variability. There's more things that could go wrong. So it's really important to have a medical professional there. And that's why I recommend, if anyone is listening to this and they're considering going and drinking ayahuasca in Peru or doing mushrooms at a retreat center, if it's a group size that's any larger than, let's say, 10, you need to make sure that they have a medical professional who is there to support, just because of the variability of what may happen.
Yeah, brilliant. Sure. That's a lot of guidance and wisdom there, Paul. Last question. You spoke about prohibition. Just maybe you want to unpack that and sort of the future of psychedelics and how it's growing, and just so your heart's desire for this incredibly powerful tool. And I'm starting the journey. I tell people within the tribe, I haven't missed a day's work in 24 years as a physician to sickness or ill health. So, I've run over 40,000 kilometers on the road, 11 huge ultra distance running races. I just, it's mind, body, a lot of biohacking, a lot of auditing, a lot of knowing myself, a lot of emotional work in that. But I do want to start the journey just so that I've got some type of experience with people that I trust. But tell us about the future, and then also just about prohibition, what you mean by that. I know in South Africa, to get psilocybin now, it's a Section 21, which means the physician has to apply to the medical board to get approval. That looks like it's going to change with a lot of the research. We've had a psychiatrist, Dr. Naeem Mullah, on the show talk about psychedelics and psilocybin. We've spoken about ketamines as well with physicians that are doing it. But yeah, give us your views on those two areas.
Yeah, so when it comes to the legal landscape, I can't speak to South Africa as well, just because I don't know it super well. But I can tell you that in the United States, Colorado has legalized plant medicines. Oregon has legalized psilocybin. There is a bill on the desk of the governor of California to legalize mushrooms, San Pedro and ayahuasca. And Canada, it looks like federally will follow pretty soon, and they will legalize a lot of these plant medicines. So, Mexico has decriminalized many of them. Costa Rica decriminalized. A lot of countries in South America allow for the legal use of ayahuasca. So, all of that to say is 5 years ago, that was still widespread prohibition. These essentially were illegal everywhere. In the last 5 years, we've seen substantial progress and improvements. And I think it looks like next year the FDA will approve MDMA to treat PTSD. The FDA is sort of the Federal Drug Administration in the United States. So MDMA will be available to treat PTSD next year. And it looks like by 2027, psilocybin, the synthetic form, will be approved by the FDA to treat depression. So all of that said, by the end of this decade, I would expect there to be widespread accessibility of psychedelics in the United States, in North America. I would imagine also in Europe, especially as a medicine. And then there's a few other places as well, like Thailand, that are exploring creating more access to this. So my expectation is that sooner rather than later, folks will be able to access these medicines in a safe and legal format, which I think makes a world of difference for so many reasons that we explored in the conversation today.
Brilliant. And then just the last one, what are you really excited about with regards to psychedelics?
For me, what I am most excited about is the potential that they have to change the way that we create business and the way that we lead. Right. I'm particularly really interested in, for those that are the leaders, creators, and builders of tomorrow, how can psychedelics help them to wake up, to create systems within business that are more in alignment with this sense of interconnectedness, that are more in alignment with nature and the natural environment. So that's what I get most excited about, is how do we shift the consciousness of the leaders and builders of tomorrow to create new systems that are rooted in a paradigm of reciprocity and regeneration rather than consumerism and extraction.
Brilliant. Paul Austin, I want to just declare favor and blessing over you, that you would just rise up with much courage in your calling. I salute you. I honor you. I respect you. You're a man who's just living out this passion. What I love about it, we didn't talk much about third wave, but we probably hopefully have you on again next year talking about that. It'll be a privilege and honor to have you on. But you're a man who's done the due diligence. You put the training, you put the rails in. Rivers are beautiful. They've got banks and they've got beautiful water and living water that flows. But we do need those banks. We do need those people alongside us. So you've really done the A to Z of it, and you partnered with people like Dr. David Rabin, which we really, really respect and honor. So well done to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your generosity and for your blessing and for what ended up being a very fun podcast together. It was really an honor to be here.